Exercise 102 revisits compound interest. Now, there are a couple of things to be aware of about compound interest, and that is that the formula doesn't actually give you the compound interest. Now, we've talked about that before. The formula for compound interest does appear on your reference sheet, but in disguise. It's presented in this format. Unfortunately, it doesn't have this explanation about the formula, so I'll talk about that. We are much more familiar with the compound interest formula written as A equals P times 1 plus R to the N. However, we'll see that there's a lot of similarity between these two formulas. So we know that A represents the final amount in the account after we've invested some money. And that amount of money is P. We invest at R%, where R is written as a decimal per unit of time, and N is the number of periods of time. So then over here, the FV stands for the future value, which is the same concept as the amount that's in the account in the future. Present value is the amount that was deposited, and we've got R and N, which are exactly the same as our understanding for R and N in the compound interest formula. Other things we know, and I've already said about this compound interest formula, are that the formula doesn't actually give you the interest. If you want to calculate the interest, the actual compound interest that's been earned, then it's clearly the difference between how much you have in your account in the future and how much was originally put in there. So we do this FV minus present value to work out the amount of actual compound interest. That's why there's a difference in the amounts. I'll go straight into example 4. It says 8,500 is invested for 4 years, 7.5% per annum, compounded monthly. Calculate the interest earned. Can't emphasise enough all those things we've been practicing all throughout the preliminary course, in that when we read a question, we identify key pieces of information and then we translate them into something that looks a little bit more mathematical. So invested for obviously any number we come across, years, 7.5% per annum. This is really important. This sets the units for both R and N, and we can see they have to be months, which is a problem because the time was given in years and the rate was given in annum, so both of those values have to be adjusted. And in addition to that, the question says calculate the interest earned. So it's very tempting to jump straight to the formula, which is fine, but the formula, we have to know, doesn't give us the interest. We want the interest, we're having this additional step in our working. So writing now more mathematically, what we have here is that the amount invested was that. The time is 4 years. Please write it exactly like that. As it appears in the question, write it like that initially. We make the adjustment based on the compounding period. 4 years is 48 months. That adjustment must be made. That is the number we use in our calculation for N. R is given as 7.5% per annum. Write it exactly as it appears in the question and then make the adjustment. So we know it has to be written as a decimal. But if that's the amount per year, then we must divide it by 12 to have the amount per month. And I would just leave it like that. You can go to your calculator and see if that works out to be some nice decimal. And it does. So a lot of people will prefer to use a decimal in their calculation rather than the fraction. If you're running out of time, stay with the fraction. Because these two are exactly the same. And please note what you're finding. Make yourself write it. And it would be called compound interest. You know, there's a great connection, a greater connection between what your brain does if you've actually physically written it with your hand. So making yourself write it with your hand reinforces what's going to go on in your thought processes. Very strong connection between what your hand's doing and your thought process. So help yourself out by actually writing these things down. So before we can get the compound interest, we can see from here we have to have the future value. The future value will be our 8,500, 1 plus our 0.00625, and we're raising that to 48. And the answer to our calculation is 11,463.09279. Now, we'd be happy with that because it's bigger than the amount that we invested. We invested 8,500, and now our account is up to 11,463. Why is there so much more money in there? Because it earned interest, and that interest is called the compound interest. Please make sure you round it to some sensible amount. When we're talking in money, it makes sense to cut it off at 2dp because we do keep track of the cents, unless we're advised otherwise in a question. We've got more to do than just work out the future value, and hopefully by having written this, we won't forget that we're up to here. We need to calculate the compound interest, and you see that it is $2,963.10.